Sylvia Plath. She's one of those authors that everyone knows, even the people that hasn't read her work. For a lot of people, she's famous for being the author of The Bell Jar, a novel about a young, brilliant woman named Esther Greenwood that is just crushed under the pressure of society, identity, ambition, expectations. But for a lot of other people, Sylvia Plath is famous for a tragic life, that she died at the age of 30, her abusive relationships, her suicide attempt, her suffering, her mental illness. But this is where the misunderstanding starts, because for a lot of people, Sylvia Plath is known just for The Bell Jar, but the center of her artistic life was actually her poems. She was first and foremost a poet. She actually was one of the leading figures in a style called confessional poetry, which is a style of poetry that includes intimate, personal, psychological, and even taboo subjects, and using all this as serious literary material. So Sylvia Plath took her private pain and turned it into art. So this video today is going to be all about Sylvia Plath. Not only as the writer of The Bell Jar, but as Sylvia Plath as a poet, as a daughter, as a mother, as a wife, as a symbol of feminism, as one of the most brilliant white writers in the 20th century, and also as one of the most misunderstood writers of her time. So stay tuned. Now, let's begin with looking at who was Sylvia Plath. What was her life like, her short life like? Now, Sylvia Plath was born in 1932 in Boston, Massachusetts. And from a very, very young age, she was already just brilliant, disciplined, and very ambitious. And this is very important because Sylvia Plath is often described as having mental illnesses. His suicide is often brought up, but the gigantic amount of work she put down is often disregarded. She was a brilliant writer. Already at the age of 8, her first poem was published in a newspaper, and she built all her identity around her poems and her literature. She wrote her poems at an extremely young age, and she focused on that. So she was not just one of those people that dreams about becoming a writer. She worked very hard every single day, very seriously, to achieve greatness, to become a great writer. So she was incredibly ambitious, incredibly talented, and all this from a very young age. She went on to go to Smith College, which is an all-woman college, and there she excelled academically. She did great work. She developed herself as a writer, and later she went to the University of Cambridge in England on a Fulham scholarship. And these are not small achievements, because you have to remember that this was in 1950s. At that time, it was a lot harder for a woman to achieve these things. And there was a lot of pressure put on her, because when you go to the University of Cambridge, for instance, it's expected that you should be very smart, intelligent, also socially be likable, that you should achieve success and greatness. And she uses all these expectations as inspirations in her work, in her poems, in The Bell Jar. So she draws on her personal experiences and the things and societal pressures she felt being a very young, ambitious, brilliant woman that achieved great things. Again, this was in the 1950s, and at that time it was expected that women should get an education, they should be ambitious, excel, but also that they shouldn't be too independent, they should be marriageable. It was a lot of expectation placed on a woman, and Sylvia Plath felt all these expectations. Now, another part of Sylvia Plath's life that had a very big emotional effect on her and also was reflected in her work was her family. So her father, Otto, was a specialist on bees, and bees is something, a metaphor and a symbol Sylvia Plath often uses in poems and her work. And he died at a very early age. When Sylvia Plath was 8 years old, her father died. And her father grew bigger after her death, meaning that his absence had a very big effect on Sylvia Plath. And this is especially seen in her poems, Daddy, where you can see that the father figure is turned into something terrifying as a symbol of authority, power, abandonment, and emotional domination. And Sylvia Plath herself also describes that Her father was very authoritative. He was like the traditional family head, and their mother had to be submissive, which also had a very big effect on her. However, she and her mother were very close, so she often wrote letters and journals that she sent to her mother, and this has become a great part of her work. Again, in these letters to her mother, you can see that she feels a lot of expectations placed on her, and she wants to get away from all those expectations. Another person that had a huge effect on Sylvia Plath's life was his husband, Ted Hughes. So Sylvia Plath met the famous poet Ted Hughes when she was at Cambridge. They got married, and there are a lot of allegations that the relationship was abusive, that Ted Hughes was abusive, and that this had a huge negative effect on Sylvia. Also, when Ted Hughes left Sylvia Plath and started a relationship with another woman, a lot of people say that this was a source of huge suffering for Sylvia, and all these experiences with her family, her father, all are reflected through her work and are sources of emotional inspiration. Why everyone remembers the bell jar. Now, the first thing we have to get out of the way when we're going to talk about Sylvia Plath is the bell jar. So the bell jar is Sylvia Plath's most famous work. It's the first thing that pops into people's mind when they think about Sylvia Plath. And the bell jar, it's a novel that a lot of people, especially a lot of women, feel very connected to. They feel like they see themselves. They feel like they have felt on a lot of the same emotions. So the bell jar is a semi-biographical novel, meaning that a lot of the stories there are based on Sylvia Plath's own life and her own history. The novel is a set about Esther Greenwood, a young, brilliant, ambitious woman. She gets a great internship at a big magazine in New York. She's a college student. She has a lot of possibilities in the future, and she's living the life that just a lot of people are dreaming about. So in the traditional societal view of things, she should be very happy, very successful. But inside, she feels empty. She feels like the expectations society has placed on her are crushing her. She feels like the things that society tells you you should strive for and achieve are not actually the things that make you happy. And a very big metaphor, important metaphor used in this novel is the fig tree. And here all the different figs on the tree represents different possibilities. So one fig represents the possibility to go overseas and study languages. Another one is marriage. Another one is focusing all on the career and achieving greatness there. And if you choose one, the others will fall away, meaning that if you choose one identity, the other identities will fall away. And it's a very strong metaphor, and it's a very strong metaphor a lot of people have felt on. And especially for women, they're told that they can do anything and achieve anything, but you see that all the choices they have, they're mutually exclusive. So if you choose one, the other ones fall apart, and it becomes a paradox. And this is also some of the things that have led Sylvia Plath to become a feminist icon, because it shows that a woman can be very intelligent, can be very ambitious, but that society does not provide enough space for that ambition to exist, and that success can actually become a form of pressure. And the novel Bell Jar the huge success of the novel Bell Jar has in a way become a problem in itself, because Sylvia Plath was first and foremost a poet, and the work she was really proud of was poems like Lady Lazarus or Ariel, and these poems are often forgotten for the sake of the bell jar, and that's something sad, and that's a part of Sylvia Plath that is often forgotten and misunderstood. And it is that the best way for her to reflect her emotions was through her poems, and that's where you can see her ideas and thoughts most clearly. Now, that brings us to the next section of this video, which is Sylvia Plath and her poems, meaning Sylvia Plath as a poetess. So, Sylvia Plath is first and foremost known for her poems. Her first collection of poems, the Colossus, came out in 1960, but she's most famous for Ariel, which is a collection of poems that came out in 1965 after her death. And Ariel is known for being fierce, for being very strong, for being violent, controlled, and unmistakable, and it shocked a lot of readers. And Sylvia Plath is associated with a style of poetry called confessional poetry, which draws on experiences, personal suffering and trauma and taboo subject as serious literary experience. But for Sylvia Plath, this is not completely true and can be misunderstood. Because yes, Sylvia Plath uses personal experiences and personal emotions and sufferings and her own mental illness as inspiration when she writes the poems. But that's not the complete case. She also stretches out the events. It's theatrical, it's sharp, is exaggerated. So when you see an I in Sylvia Plath's poems, it could be Sylvia Plath's own voice, her own personal life, her personal experiences, emotions, but it could also be theatrical and stretched out. So it's not just her confessing stories that happen. Her poems are not her diary entries, but her poems are crafted, master-crafted arts of work. Every line and every word is sharply thought through, and she uses theatrics, repetition, rhythm, together with emotions and personal suffering to craft the master of work, which is her poems. Now, some of Sylvia Plath's most famous poems and works are first and foremost Lady Lazarus. So Sylvia Plath knows that people, the audience meaning, has a fascination with female suffering. People has a fascination with female suffering and they want to read about it and understand it. So Lady Lazarus is not only about female suffering, but here she uses the audience fascination with it to turn the light back at them, to expose the audience. So here she uses theatrics, she uses very dark humor and very taboo and dark subjects such as suicide, and uses it to turn the light against audiences. So this is not her just drawing on her personal experiences, but she wants to expose her audience for these topics and emotions. So that's Lady Lazarus. Another one of her very famous poems is Daddy, which is about a figure becoming too big in your mind. So it's about emotional suffering and emotional suffering being just unbearing. And here you might see more of her personal experiences, but again, there's also some theatrics, some exaggeration, some of it is rhythmical, some of it is nearly childlike. And here you see grief presented as rage. So it's not only symbolic about a person that loses one of their parents, but it's used as, that loss is used as a symbolism. And then you have her maybe most famous poem, which is Ariel. Now, Ariel was released after her death, and it's very, in some ways, very different from her other poems. Now, this poem is often misread as being about riding a horse, but it's about so much more than that. It's about feeling out of control. It's about wanting to break free. It's about self-loss. It's transformational. It's about release. So it's about rushing towards something. And this is Sylvia Plath saying that she wants to break free from being trapped. So it's a very strong emotional poem, and it's probably the most famous and one of her best works. And then you have also one of her other very famous poems, which is Tulips. So Tulip is written in a hospital setting, and it just shows the craftsmanship of Sylvia Plath, because here she turns everyday ordinary situations and things into things that suddenly become strange. So tulips are often flowers that are well liked, they symbolizes positive things, but here the tulips are nearly turned violent. So Sylvia Plath here just mastered the language in such a way that make things that feel familiar to us and positive to us and turn them into something completely different. The great thing with Sylvia Plath was that she had all of these experiences and emotions she could draw on, but the dangerous thing here is that to think that these things defined her. So let's say her marriage with Ted Hughes, a lot of people say it was abusive. She obviously drew a lot of emotions and a lot of experiences from her marriage into their writing. And same thing with their father. The poem Daddy reflects a lot of things she experienced, like the loss of a parent. What she saw was an imbalance in the relationship between her parents. But what is dangerous here is to think that the poems are just diary entries, that the marriage with Ted Hughes is defining her, or that her father is defining her. That interpretation misses the point that Sylvia Plath is a great, great writer, and that her poems is actually a reflection of her extraordinary ability to write poems, her extraordinary good ability to draw on her suffering, her experiences, and show them in a very strong way to the audience, in a way that exposes us and makes us feel a lot of the same things. So it's not the experiences that defines Sylvia Plath, but Sylvia Plath draws on those experiences, and her work is reflecting her genius, her very good ability to write poems. Now that we have reviewed some of Sylvia Plath's work and her tragic background, a lot of people might ask the question, why has Sylvia Plath become a symbol of feminism? Because she writes about mental illnesses, her own personal experiences. So what here is it that women find inspiring? And what women often find inspiring in her work is that she's writing from a female perspective, and she often writes about the pressure and expectations that are placed on women, especially since she lived in the 1950s and she wrote a lot about that time era. She writes a lot about expectations that are placed on women to be intelligent, to be beautiful, but at the same time be marriageable, to be a good wife, and that all these things is suffocating and crushing people. And these experiences inspired a lot of women, and she wrote about these things at a time where women were expected to just carry it and to not talk about it at all. So the fact that she talked about it was something a lot of women found inspiring, and not only feminists, but her work inspired women all around the world. Even normal middle-class women read her work and was inspired by it. That was some of the things that made her work really great, that the experiences she wrote and talked about was common experiences that a lot of people feel. A lot of people feel the expectations society places on people, even till this day. Now we come to the final part of this video, which is, why do people misunderstand and misread Sylvia Plath? So the first reason people misunderstand and misread Sylvia Plath works is ironically, because of the bell jar. The bell jar becomes so popular that a lot of people only associate that work with Sylvia Plath and forget that she is actually first and foremost a poetry, and poetry is where Sylvia Plath shines. That's where you see her being very sharp, very direct. That's where she transforms depressions and mental illness into an art form nearly. And it's very tragic that people don't see that side of her work, where she can be fiery and fierce in her poems. And secondly, it's because of the tragedy problem. Sylvia Plath tragically killed herself when she was only 30 years old. And a lot of people go and read her poems, and they go and read the bell jar, and they look for signs for why did she kill herself. Oh, maybe this is the sign, this is a sign. And when you read everything as a sign of mental illness, or you go back and try to see everything in light of her death, you're not really seeing the greatness, the funny sides, the sharp sides. You're not seeing the greatness in the poems. So you have to read the poems not only through the lens of the suicide. Another one is that her poetry is often described as confessional poetry, but she was not only confessing in her poems. It was not only her personal diary entries. Sylvia Plath was a master in the art of the language. She published her first poem when she was only 8 years old, and she was very good at using a lot of different techniques. Rhythm, she used theatrics, she exaggerated, so everything cannot be seen as a personal story when you read her poems or when you read the bell jar. And of course, lastly, you have the female anger problem, because when men write, in an angry style. They're often seen as rebellious or very philosophical. But when women do it, a lot of people get uncomfortable and treat it as instabilities. When a lot of people read the poems of Sylvia Plath when she's very fierce, they get very uncomfortable and they just see it as instability and sign of instability. And that's why people often misread Sylvia Plath too, because it's not instability. She's doing it on purpose. Every word is crafted very thoroughly, and you have to see it as an art of work. Now, to give a conclusion, Sylvia Plath should be remembered as one of the best poetry's in modern age. She uses the language masterfully. She draws on her personal experiences. So she should not just be seen as Ted Hughes' wife or as Otto's grieving daughter, or just be remembered for the Belger, or just be remembered for her suffering and mental illness. She should be remembered for being one of the best poets. She should be remembered for how masterful she was when using the language, and how great she was on using personal trauma, using the things she experienced as a brilliant young woman, and using the feelings and the expectations that were placed on her and expressing it in her art form, which was poetry. And that's what makes Sylvia Plath so great. That's why Sylvia Plath has inspired generations of young men and women that often feel the same kind of pressure, especially women that often feels all these expectations placed on them, feeling a bit suffocated. And Sylvia Plath is there not to comfort you, but expresses all this in a masterful way. Now, thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment, and let us know what you think about Sylvia Plath. Thank you.